Hey, welcome back. Sean and Rob again. So in the previous video, we were looking primarily at Mark 7, and we were looking at how Jesus really leaned in heavily on the Pharisees, rebuking them for honoring traditions that they had made up. And actually, it wasn't even traditions they really made up, but traditions that were made up in previous generations that they were honoring. So they were honoring traditions established by the elders more than they were committed to obedience to the commands of God. And so in this video, we're gonna really start to explore, are we doing the same thing today? When we're doing the church intensive in San Francisco or kind of in person somewhere else, we do an exercise, and we'll have a whiteboard. And on this whiteboard, I will, or whoever's leading this time, will just write on one side of the board commands. And in parentheses next to it, we put not optional, right? And what we're doing on that side of the board is we're creating a list of things that are clearly commanded of us as new covenant believers. And what we're trying to get at is, do we treat these as though they are non-negotiables in our church culture? Or do a lot of the things that are written on that side of the board feel within the culture of our church to be optional? For example, Rob and I were ministering in San Francisco Bay Area, and we could say, well, given our context, we found that people in the Bay Area tend to not really like this command and this command and this command. And so for the sake of contextualization, we've just decided to not really emphasize those that much, or not to really expect them that much, because we want more people to come to know Jesus. But what we're saying is, no. If God has commanded this of us, then we need to be taking it seriously. And the culture of our church needs to be clear that this is serious. And so we're going to get into a lot of those commands and talking about and asking ourselves the question, do these feel non-negotiable in our churches, or do they feel very optional? And then on the other hand, on the other side of the board, we have at the top, it says traditions. And in parentheses, we just have optional. And what we're doing there is creating a list of things that so often in the church today can feel so important, feel like non-negotiables, but there is no command in Scripture that would say that we do need to be doing that, and therefore it is optional. And so what we saw in Mark 7, the example of that was washing your hands before you eat. So obviously, again, washing your hands before you eat, it's not a bad thing, but the point is that it's optional, and Jesus was rebuking them for treating it like it was more important or equally important to God's commands. So all that to kind of set up, that's where we're headed. We're going to be doing that exercise together. Rob, could you just, give us a little window into what's one of your biggest observations of when we do this exercise live in person with people coming to visit?
Yeah, so when we're populating the whiteboard, commands, traditions, things start to go up on the whiteboard really fast on the command side, which is a good thing. All discipleship and baptism and communion and all very good things, loving one another, all that good stuff. It's very important. They're imperatives. What's interesting, and probably one of my biggest observations doing this for 3 years, almost every week, is love the Lord your God with everything ends up at the bottom of the list. And it's kind of funny, but it's really kind of sad. And I think the reason why is not because people don't love God. It's just that they assume, it's assumed, it's assumed, yeah, that, of course we love God. Of course, we love him with everything. But I don't know, we have to ask ourselves, sometimes ministry, can it be an idol in your life? Can you love the ministry more than you actually love the person of Jesus? Can you be in love with the things of God as opposed to God himself? Can you be more after the gifts than the giver of the gifts? And so this observation, it's not like one or two times, it's on a regular basis. love the Lord your God with everything is at the bottom of the list. And you know that passage in Matthew 22 where, you know, the religious leaders are all trying to trip up Jesus with all these questions about marriage and resurrection and all this stuff. And then, you know, this lawyer asks him, he says, "Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law?" And he said to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the great and foremost commandment. The second is like it. You should love one another, right? And love your neighbor as yourself." So, man, it's so clear that Jesus isn't like saying, hey, you know, that's second or third. Like, this is everything. Everything hangs on this, that you love God with everything.
Yeah. And, you know, as you're talking, it makes me think about a quote I remember hearing from Leonard Ravenhill, where he would say, if you want to see how popular the preacher is, come on Sunday morning. If you want to see how popular God is, come to the prayer meeting. And, you know, it's not fully, you know, fair, right? But there is something that's very interesting, though, about that. If we kind of just look at that observation, like if you take a church of maybe 300 people, and the pastor gets up and says, "Hey, everybody, we've really been feeling led to deeper prayer and intimacy with him. And, you know, over the next month, we want to meet on Friday nights for 2 hours just to seek his face as a body." And we ask all the time in the church intensive, out of 300 people, based on your experience, and these are pastors, leaders, elders, how many people do you think will come on Friday night? Right? There's no worship band playing. There's no, you know, gifted communicator up front. It's just, we're going to come together and we're going to seek his face and pray. And consistently people will say, I don't know, 10, 15. Now, and that, of course, that number could vary, right? And the point is not, hey, if anybody doesn't come on Friday nights, they don't actually love Jesus. That's not the point we're trying to make. But so often in the church, we can really settle for people that kind of like him or kind of would be excited about prayer, but not really, or will come on Sunday as long as you do things just right. You have the right worship team up there. You have the right preacher up there. You have the right coffee. You have, like, we can so often in the church try to make things in such a way where it's as convenient as possible for people to be a part of this body. But if we were to strip that stuff away, would they still come, right? If it was just, hey, we're going to take communion, we're going to pray together, we're going to fellowship over the word, we're going to love each other. How many people are really excited about living out Acts 2 and Acts 4? And I think there are a lot of people out there, but it can get so confusing when we make it about a lot of other things. I remember Francis going and speaking at a conference in Texas, and a friend of his who's a pastor in India was picking him up and driving him there. And as they're pulling up, this pastor goes, "Man, you Americans," right? As he sees all these animals being ushered in and famous worship bands are going to be there, famous preachers, of which Francis is one, right? But he goes, "You Americans, nobody will come unless you got a great show. In India, people will walk 5 miles just to pray." And I think a lot of us have realized, gosh, we've lost something. We made a big misstep when it becomes this big show and we're drawing people. And then we have to ask ourselves the question, who's really ready to die for him? Who's really all in on this thing? Not only who's willing to die for him, but who's still going to come if the worship band isn't very good? Or if, you know, whatever scenario might play out that's kind of inconvenient. So that's part of what we've been wrestling through. Rob, any kind of thoughts off of that?
Yeah, I think that it's good because all the things you're highlighting are going to be thrown up on the whiteboard probably. And we have to ask ourselves that question, right? If we took away childcare, the children's ministry, not that you have to, not that it's bad, but how many people would leave your church? If you took away the excellent worship team, which is a good thing, we love that. We love loud, extravagant worship. That's wonderful. But if that wasn't there, how many people would walk? If there wasn't that gifted preacher or that celebrity pastor, how many people would walk? And that's the thing you have to ask. If they're walking because that's not there anymore, what are they devoted to? Is it Jesus or is it that thing? Whether it's children's ministry, great pastor, or whatever it is. We want to create a place where people would just say, Jesus is enough. I'm here because I love him. If there's no great band, there's no great children's ministry, there's no Starbucks or bookstore, I'm still here. I'm here because I love him. So I think that's going to be like the springboard for all of the whiteboard session.
Yeah. And so that's where we're headed. We're going to be going a little bit more into loving God and the implications of that, and how do we build that out within the culture of our church, because that's what we want to be all about, right? I think part of the challenge of this, though, that we're going to see, and when you observe Jesus's ministry, and this is part of what we're going to look at coming up here in the next video or two, when you look at Jesus's ministry, it's so clear he was not interested in trying to keep people who weren't serious about loving him. People that were kind of like half in, half out. Jesus was not interested in trying to keep them around. Now, he definitely engaged with the masses at points, but he wasn't willing to do this song and dance to keep them. And the reality that came out of that is that a lot of people walked away from him. His numbers often dwindled down. And I almost kind of want to warn you that that sort of wrestle, I think, is going to be big going forward. Are we comfortable with seeing people walk away if they don't really love him? Or, on the other hand, will we do whatever we can to try to keep them, even if they don't have the Spirit of God in them? Now, of course, I know we want to keep them around to share the gospel with them, right? And that's not necessarily what we're talking about. Of course, we want to maintain relationship with people who are unbelievers and share Jesus with them. But so often we want those people to keep them in the church, that they would be a part of the church, even though if we strip some of this stuff back, they would walk away. They wouldn't be truly interested. And I guess also in light of what's going on right now in our culture, it seems like whether we like it or not, the Lord's really pressing in on this. I don't want to assume what God's intending to do, but it seems like one of the things that's coming out of this time is stripping away some of these things we might be drawing people with. Because now either people are going to engage relationally online or in smaller contexts, but pulling off these big shows with these great performances in person, it's about impossible right now. And who knows how long it's going to be before we're even able to have 500 people in a room doing that sort of thing. Are we going to have to go smaller? And is that smaller then going to mean a little less impressive? Not quite as professional and polished. So anyway, these are a lot of the things we're going to be wrestling through going forward. Rob, any last thoughts?
I think that's good. I think you hit it good. And I'm pretty sure you probably said it in the last video, but you remember that analogy you used a while back where you said, we have to be willing to take everything and put it in the middle of the room and say, is that still needed? Do we still need to do that if it's not a command, right? So I think that it's going to be good. This is going to be a good session. I'm excited.